deep under the ice of Antarctica, in a chamber that had been sealed for longer than any human civilization had existed, a machine had been waiting. It had been waiting so long that the stars above it had drifted from their places. It had been waiting since before the first human walked upright on open ground. And in the year 2247, a team of researchers finally woke it up. The object they found was a disk, wider than a dinner table, made of a metal that no scanner could fully identify. Its surface was covered in tiny dots, lines, and curves that looked, at first glance, like a piece of abstract art. But when the ice around it melted away and the first clean image was taken, everyone in the room went silent. It was a star map, a very old one. Dr. Alina Voss had spent 11 years studying ancient human artifacts before that day, and she had never seen anything like it. She was in the room when the final layer of ice was removed, wearing a heavy coat and gloves that did nothing to stop the cold from reaching her bones. She remembered staring at the disk under the harsh work lights and feeling, for the first time in her career, genuinely afraid of how old something could be. "This can't be right," said Tomas, one of the junior researchers, as he ran the dating equipment for the third time. "The metal alloy is stable, the readings are clean. It says this thing is at least 80,000 years old." "Run it again," Alina said, though she already believed him. 80,000 years. That was long before humans had built the first city, long before anyone had learned to write, long before anyone had even settled in one place instead of following herds across the land. Humanity had no history of building anything like this disk. And yet there it was, buried under ice that had grown around it slowly, year after year, for tens of thousands of winters. The bigger mystery came later, once the star patterns on the disk were compared against modern astronomical charts. Nothing matched. Whole constellations were missing. Some stars shown clearly on the disk did not exist anymore in the sky above Earth, meaning they had likely died, gone supernova, or collapsed long before human telescopes could ever have seen them. Other stars on the disk were in positions that made no sense for the current shape of the galaxy. It was as if someone had taken a picture of the galaxy, the way it looked 100,000 years ago, or even earlier, and carved it into solid metal so it would never be forgotten. The problem was that no civilization from that era, if one had even existed, should have been advanced enough to make something so precise. And no civilization since had claimed to have made it. It was simply there, sitting under the ice, like a message left behind by someone who wanted it found, but not too soon. News of the discovery reached the wider public within days, and reached the Conquered, the alliance of spacefaring species that Earth had joined only 12 years earlier, within hours. Humanity was still the newest and, by most other species standards, the least impressive member of the Conquered. Humans had barely mastered faster-than-light travel. They had a handful of colonies, a modest fleet, and a reputation for being loud, stubborn, and a little too curious for their own good. Nobody expected them to find something that made even the oldest Conquered archives look young. Alina was asked to lead the research team that would study what the Conquered scientists began calling the Meridian Disk, after the strange spiral line that ran through its center like a compass needle, pointing to nothing anyone recognized. Within a month, teams from 3 other species had been invited to help decode it, all under a careful agreement that the disk itself would remain on Earth, in human hands at all times. It was, after all, a human discovery found on human soil. That agreement did not sit well with everyone. The Skarn Dominion was one of the oldest empires in the Conquered's neighborhood of the galaxy, and also one of the most quietly desperate. Once, centuries ago, the Skarn had controlled dozens of star systems and fielded fleets that no one dared challenge. Now their territory had shrunk, their population was aging, and their once great cities were being slowly abandoned as resources ran dry. The Skarn ambassador to the Conquered, a tall, gray-skinned diplomat named Vect Oring, had watched the announcement about the Meridian Disk with far more interest than his calm expression let on. Vect requested access to the research data almost immediately, citing historical significance for all Conquered species. His request was granted, in part because Elena and the other scientists believed that more eyes on the problem meant faster answers, and in part because refusing outright might have caused unnecessary tension with an old and proud empire. Vecht began sending his own analysts to sit in on video briefings, always polite, always careful to ask the right questions and nothing more. What nobody realized at the time was that the Skarn already suspected what the Meridian disk might be. Buried deep in their oldest and most guarded archives was a fragment of a legend, half forgotten even by the Skarn themselves, about a race that had come before all the current conquered species, a race the old texts called the Wardens. The legend said the Wardens had once walked among the stars long before anyone else, and that they had left behind maps, tools, and warnings scattered across the galaxy, hidden on quiet worlds where they believed no one would look for a very long time. The Skarn had spent centuries quietly hunting for any trace of the Wardens, hoping to find something, anything, that could restore their empire to its former strength. And now, on a young, unimportant planet called Earth, humans had apparently dug one straight out of the ground. Elena did not know any of this. What she knew was that the disk's carvings seemed to respond, very faintly, to certain frequencies of light. Under specific wavelengths, tiny sections of the star map would glow, revealing extra details that were invisible under normal light. It took her team almost 4 months to figure out that these glowing sections were not random. They were coordinates, hidden in layers, meant to be found only by someone patient enough to look properly. She reported this discovery to the full Research Council, made up of representatives from Earth and observers from 3 other conquered species, including the Skarn. It was, in hindsight, the last completely honest thing she did before everything went wrong. 2 weeks after her report, the Conquered held a gathering on Earth to celebrate what they called a discovery of shared galactic importance. It was meant to be a diplomatic event, held in a newly built exhibition hall in Geneva, with the Meridian disk displayed behind reinforced glass at the center of the room, surrounded by human security and monitored by systems from 3 different species to prevent any tampering. Ambassadors, scientists, and journalists from a dozen worlds attended. Elena stood near the disk for most of the evening, answering questions and trying to enjoy what should have been the proudest moment of her career. She did not notice Vecht Orin slip away from the main hall an hour before the incident. She did not notice the 2 Skarn technicians who had been quietly stationed near the building's power systems for most of the week, supposedly helping calibrate translation equipment. She did not notice anything strange at all until the lights flickered. The glass case around the Meridian disk cracked with a sound like a gunshot, and the entire hall was plunged into darkness. What happened next took less than 90 seconds, though it felt much longer to everyone who lived through it. Emergency lighting kicked in, casting the hall in dim red. Security systems that should have locked the exits instead reported a total network failure. Elena remembered running toward the display, shouting for someone to check the disk, and finding only broken glass and empty air where the Meridian disk had been sitting only moments before. By the time the power was restored and the exits unlocked, there was no trace of the thieves. No footage, no fingerprints, no clean trail for the security drones to follow. Whoever had taken the disk had planned the theft carefully, using technology that jammed nearly every sensor in the building at once. It was, by any measure, a professional job, far too professional for random criminals. The Conquered Security Council was called into an emergency session within the hour. Human officials demanded answers. Ambassadors from other species expressed shock and sympathy, all except for Vecht Orin, who offered his condolences with the same calm, careful voice he always used, and quietly excused himself from Earth only 2 days later, citing urgent matters back home. Elena spent that first night after the theft sitting alone in her office, staring at the last full scan her team had made of the Meridian disk before it disappeared. It was not the original, and it did not glow the way the real disk did under the right light, but it was something. She zoomed into the section of hidden coordinates her team had only just begun to decode, the section she had reported to the Council 2 weeks earlier. A message came through on her secure terminal a few minutes later. It was from Captain Marcus Reyes, an officer with Earth's small but growing defense fleet, someone she had worked with before on matters involving conquered security. His message was short. "We think we know who took it. We think we know why. And we need you to help us get it back before they figure out what it actually leads to." Alina read the message twice, then looked back at the star map on her screen, a galaxy that no longer existed, waiting patiently to be understood by whoever was determined enough to follow it all the way to the end. She closed her laptop, grabbed her coat, and went to find out exactly what humanity had just lost, and what it might cost to get it back. Captain Marcus Reyes met Alina Voss in a small briefing room 3 floors below Earth Defense Fleet headquarters, a room with no windows and walls thick enough to stop most forms of remote listening. He was a broad-shouldered man in his 40s, with the tired eyes of someone who had spent the last 24 hours awake. On the table between them sat a folder marked with the highest clearance level humanity currently used. "Before I show you anything," Marcus said, "I need to know how confident you are in your reading of those hidden coordinates, the ones you reported to the Council 2 weeks ago." Alina sat down across from him. "Reasonably confident. We only decoded a small piece of it, maybe 5% of the full data layer. Why?" Marcus slid the folder across the table. Inside was a single printed page, showing a star system with a designation Alina did not recognize, followed by a short summary written by Fleet Intelligence. "Because that 5% was enough for someone else to act on. We picked up unusual Skarn fleet movement 6 hours ago. 3 ships left Skarn territory heading toward a system on the edge of conquered space. A system that, as far as our records show, has been empty and lifeless for longer than anyone has bothered to check." "You think that's connected to the disk?" "I think it's too much of a coincidence that Skarn ships moved within hours of the disk going missing, toward a system that happens to sit almost exactly where your team's decoded coordinates pointed." Marcus tapped the page. "We didn't have this information until your report went into the shared Council database. The Skarn ambassador had access to that same database." Alina felt something cold settle in her stomach. "I gave them the coordinates myself, in the report." "You gave the Conquered the coordinates. You didn't know the Skarn ambassador would use them to plan a theft." Marcus leaned back. "This isn't your fault, Doctor, but it does mean you're the only person on Earth who fully understands what that data means, and Fleet Command wants you on the recovery team." Over the next 3 days, Alina barely left the Defense Fleet building. She worked alongside Marcus and a small team of analysts, going back through every scan, every measurement, and every note her research team had taken on the Meridian disk before it was stolen. They had backups of most of the surface imaging, though nowhere near the detail of the original. It was enough, however, to start piecing together a clearer picture of what the disk actually was. The star map on its surface, they now believed, was not simply old. It was a snapshot of the galaxy from a specific and very precise point in time, deliberately chosen, showing star positions, stellar lifespans, and the locations of certain systems that had since changed dramatically. Several of the marked stars had already gone supernova by the time humans invented writing. A few systems shown as thriving on the map were now nothing but scattered debris and cold rock, destroyed by some catastrophe long before recorded history began. "Why would anyone make a map like this?" asked Priya Nair, one of the younger analysts on the team, "if it was already out of date by the time it was buried?" Alina had been asking herself the same question for days, and she thought she finally had an answer, because it wasn't meant to be read the normal way. It's not just a map of stars. Look here. She pulled up an overlay comparing the disk's markings to modern maps of gravitational anomalies and old radiation trails left by ancient stellar events. The map isn't just showing where the stars were, it's showing how the galaxy changed. Where things died, where things moved, where things were destroyed. If you know how to read it properly, it's not a snapshot, it's a record, a history. Marcus frowned at the display. A history of what? "I don't know yet," Alina admitted. "But someone built this because they wanted whoever found it, tens of thousands of years later, to understand something important. And I don't think it was an accident that it ended up buried on Earth." That last point troubled her more than anything else. Every dating test confirmed the disk was far older than human civilization. It had been placed in that Antarctic chamber deliberately, sealed in a way that protected it from the elements for tens of thousands of years, waiting. Waiting for someone to dig deep enough and be curious enough to find it. The question that kept Alina awake at night was simple: waiting for who? While Alina and her team worked on the data, Marcus focused on tracking the stolen disk itself. Fleet intelligence confirmed that the 3 Skarn ships spotted leaving Dominion territory were part of a small, heavily shielded strike group, the kind normally used for covert operations rather than open warfare. Their course had been carefully plotted to avoid major conquered patrol routes, weaving through less monitored space along the way. "They're not trying to start a war," Marcus explained during one of the team briefings. "If they wanted a fight, they'd have brought a bigger fleet and made their move openly. This is a smash-and-grab operation. Get in, get the disk, follow the coordinates, and get out before anyone can stop them or ask too many questions." "Which means they already believe those coordinates lead somewhere valuable," Alina said. "Or somewhere dangerous enough that they don't want witnesses," Marcus replied. The Conquered Security Council convened again 2 days later, and this time Earth's representatives came prepared. Marcus presented the evidence linking the Skarn fleet movement to the theft, careful to lay out the facts without making direct accusations that could not yet be fully proven. The Skarn representative at the council, a replacement sent after Vect Orain's sudden departure, denied any Dominion involvement and demanded evidence that Earth simply did not have. No footage, no confession, nothing beyond a suspicious pattern of timing and movement. The council, as councils often did, decided to open a formal investigation that would take weeks, possibly months, to reach any conclusion. For Alina and Marcus, that was far too slow. Whatever the Skarn ships were chasing, they were already halfway there. "We need our own answer," Marcus told Alina after the council session ended, both of them walking down a quiet hallway away from the chamber. "Officially, Earth Defense Fleet can't act without Conquered authorization. Unofficially, Fleet Command is prepared to send a small scout vessel to investigate that system ourselves, quietly, before the Skarn arrive and do whatever they're planning to do. You want me to come with you? I want you to lead the science side of it. You understand that map better than anyone alive. If there's something at those coordinates, we need someone who can figure out what it means before it's too late to matter." Alina thought about the disk, sitting in some cargo hold on a Skarn ship, being carried further and further from Earth toward a destination that no one currently alive fully understood. She thought about the strange, careful design of the star map, clearly built by hands, or whatever passed for hands, far more advanced than anything currently known in the Conquered. And she thought about the quiet, patient way the disk had waited under the ice for so many thousands of years, as if it had been placed there for exactly this moment. "I'm in," she said. The ship fleet command assigned to the mission was the ESV Halcyon, a small, fast scout vessel built for reconnaissance rather than combat, equipped with the best stealth systems Earth currently possessed. It was not much compared to a full Skarn strike group, but it was quick, quiet, and difficult to detect, which mattered far more for what Marcus had in mind. The crew was kept small and hand-picked. Marcus as mission commander, Alina as lead researcher, a pilot named Ingrid Sahlberg who had flown deep survey missions along the edges of conquered space for over a decade, and a small technical team responsible for keeping the ship's systems running and its presence hidden. Before departure, Alina spent one final night going through everything her team had managed to reconstruct about the Meridian Disk's hidden coordinate layer. She noticed something new, something she had missed in the rush of the previous days. Buried beneath the coordinate data was a second, smaller pattern, one that did not point to a location at all. It looked more like a sequence, almost like a lock combination, or perhaps something closer to a signal meant to be broadcast rather than followed. She brought this discovery to Marcus just hours before the Halcyon was set to launch. "It could be a key," she explained, showing him the pattern on her tablet. "Something meant to activate whatever is waiting at those coordinates. If that's true, then simply following the map to the right location might not be enough. Whoever gets there first will need this pattern too, or they might not be able to access whatever's there at all. Marcus studied the sequence for a long moment. Did you include this in your report to the council 2 weeks ago? No. I only found it a few hours ago, going back through the raw data with fresh eyes. Alina hesitated. Which means the Skarn don't have it. Not unless they've made the exact same discovery independently, and given how careful they were about the theft, I doubt they've had time to dig this deep into the data themselves. For the first time since the disk had been stolen, Marcus allowed himself a small, tired smile. Then we might actually have a chance to beat them there, or at least get in before they can use whatever they find. Get some rest, Doctor. We leave in 6 hours, and something tells me the rest of this trip is not going to be easy. Alina nodded and returned to her quarters, though sleep did not come easily. She lay awake thinking about the ancient star map, the vanished stars it depicted, and the strange, quiet civilization that had built it long before humanity had learned to speak. Somewhere out past the edge of known space, in a system that had been empty and forgotten for longer than anyone could properly measure, something was waiting. Whether it was a warning, a weapon, or something else entirely, Alina did not know. But she intended to find out, and she intended to make sure that whatever it was, humanity got there in time to decide what to do with it, rather than letting a desperate old empire decide for them. The Halcyon left Earth's orbit just before dawn, slipping quietly past the usual patrol routes, carrying with it a handful of humans, a stolen glimpse of an ancient map, and a growing sense that the galaxy humanity had only recently joined was far older, and far stranger than anyone back home yet understood. The journey to the edge of conquered space took 9 days, and every one of them felt longer than the last. The ESV Halcyon was fast, but the distance was real, and faster-than-light travel still had its limits. Alina spent most of the trip in the ship's small research bay, going over every scrap of data her team had managed to save from the Meridian disk, searching for anything they might have missed. Ingrid Sahlberg, the pilot, kept the ship well away from any major shipping lanes or patrol routes, weaving a careful path that avoided detection from Concord sensors as much as from any lingering Skarn presence. It was slow, careful flying, the kind that required patience rather than speed, and Ingrid handled it with the same calm focus she had shown on a dozen other quiet missions before this one. "You're sure about this heading?" Marcus asked her on the 6th day, standing behind her chair on the bridge as she made another small course correction. "As sure as the data lets me be," Ingrid replied. "Whoever built that map wasn't thinking about modern navigation charts. I've had to cross-reference old stellar drift models just to figure out where those coordinates actually point today, since the stars themselves have moved since the map was made. If Dr. Voss's numbers are right, we should reach the system in about 3 more days. And the Skarn. Assuming their ships are as fast as fleet intelligence thinks, they'll get there first, maybe a day, maybe 2 ahead of us." Ingrid glanced back at him. "I can't make this ship faster than physics allows, Captain." Marcus nodded and said nothing more, though the tension in his shoulders did not ease. Every day that passed meant more time for the Skarn to do whatever they intended to do with the disk, and possibly with whatever waited at the coordinates. On the 8th day, Alina finally cracked a piece of the puzzle that had been bothering her since the mission began. She called Marcus and Ingrid into the research bay, her tablet full of overlapping diagrams and half-finished notes. "I think I understand why this system was chosen," she said, pulling up a reconstructed image of the region as the Meridian disk had shown it, layered next to a modern star chart of the same area. "According to the old map, this system used to be part of something much bigger. A cluster of at least a dozen inhabited worlds, all connected, all thriving, based on the density of markings around them." "And now," Marcus asked. "Now there's nothing. One dead star, a handful of shattered planets, and empty space where the rest used to be." Alina zoomed in on the modern chart, showing scattered fragments of rock and dust drifting where whole worlds had apparently once stood. Something destroyed this cluster, a very long time ago, long enough that even the debris has mostly scattered and cooled. I don't think this was a natural disaster. Natural events don't erase this many worlds this completely, this close together. You're saying it was a weapon, Marcus said quietly. I'm saying whoever built the Meridian disk knew exactly what happened here, mapped it carefully, and made sure to preserve a record of it. Maybe as a warning. Maybe because the cause of the destruction is still here, somehow waiting. Alina looked up at him. Either way, I don't think we're walking into an empty system, Captain. I think we're walking into a graveyard, with something buried in it that someone thought was important enough to protect for 80,000 years. The mood on the Halcyon grew quieter after that conversation. Nobody spoke much during meals. Ingrid ran extra diagnostics on the ship's stealth systems without being asked. Marcus reviewed tactical plans that all assumed the worst. On the 10th day, the Halcyon dropped out of faster-than-light travel at the very edge of the dead system, sensors immediately sweeping the area for any sign of the Skarn ships. It did not take long to find them. 3 Skarn vessels sat near what remained of the system's shattered planets, their engines powered down to minimal levels, clearly holding position rather than actively searching for anything. They've stopped, Ingrid reported, studying the sensor readings. No active scanning that I can detect. It's like they're waiting for something. Or like they can't find what they're looking for, Alina said, watching the same display. If they only have the location and not the activation sequence, they might have reached the coordinates and found nothing but empty space and broken rock. No visible structure, no obvious target. Marcus considered this for a long moment. Then our advantage is still intact. We move in carefully, stay hidden as long as possible, and let Dr. Voss figure out where exactly to use that sequence before the Skarn figure out how to force their way in some other way. The Halcyon crept closer to the debris field under full stealth, engines running as quietly as the ship's systems allowed. As they closed the distance, Alina's sensors began picking up something strange buried among the scattered rock and dust. A faint but steady energy signature, far too regular to be natural, coming from what looked like a small, dark moon drifting alone among the wreckage of its former system. There, Alina said, pointing at the reading. That's not debris, that's something built. Something that's still, somehow, producing power after all this time. Marcus studied the display, then looked toward Ingrid. Can you get us close without the Skarn noticing? I can try, Ingrid said, already adjusting their course. But we're running out of room to stay hidden. Once we're inside that debris field, there's a real chance one of their scanners catches us, no matter how careful I am. They moved in slowly, weaving the Halcyon through drifting chunks of what had once been entire worlds, each piece a silent reminder of the scale of whatever disaster had happened here so long ago. Alina kept her eyes on the strange moon-like object ahead, its faint energy signature growing stronger the closer they came, until finally, its true shape became clear on the ship's main display. It was not a moon. It was a structure, built to look like one from a distance, its surface covered in the same kind of intricate carvings that had covered the Meridian disk back on Earth. Massive, ancient, and clearly artificial, it hung silently among the wreckage of the system it had apparently once been part of, untouched by whatever catastrophe had destroyed everything around it. That's Warden architecture, came a synthesized voice suddenly over the Halcyon's comm system, sharp and unexpected enough to make everyone on the bridge tense. It took a moment before Alina recognized the source, a translated Skarn transmission, apparently picked up by their sensors and automatically routed through the ship's language systems. It had not been meant for them. It was Skarn ships, talking to each other, unaware yet that the Halcyon was close enough to listen in. They know what it is, Marcus said quietly. They know what to call it, Alina corrected, still watching the structure grow larger on the display. That doesn't mean they know how to get inside. As if in answer to her words, one of the Skarn ships suddenly moved, engines flaring to life as it began adjusting position toward the ancient structure. A moment later, a bright beam of energy lanced out from the Skarn vessel, striking the surface of the moon-like structure directly. The structure did not so much as flicker in response. No visible damage, no reaction at all, as if the beam had simply been absorbed into nothing. "They're trying to force their way in," Ingrid said. "It's not going to work," Elena murmured, half to herself, watching the readings on her console. "This wasn't built to be broken into. It was built to be opened by someone who knows how." Marcus turned to her. "Do you know how?" Elena hesitated, thinking of the strange sequence buried beneath the coordinate data on the meridian disk, the one she had found only hours before the Halcyon departed Earth. "I might, but we can't test it from here. We'd need to get close enough to transmit the sequence directly at the structure, which means getting a lot closer to 3 armed Skarn ships than I'd like." Marcus was quiet for a moment, weighing the risk. Then he turned to Ingrid. "Take us in, low and quiet, along the far side of the debris field. If we can get within transmission range without being spotted, Dr. Voss gets one shot to try that sequence before the Skarn notice us." "And if they do notice us?" Ingrid asked. Marcus's expression hardened. "Then we find out very quickly just how good this little ship's stealth systems really are, and how much they've underestimated us." The Halcyon began its careful approach, sliding silently through the wreckage of a system destroyed long before humanity had learned to walk upright, racing not against time exactly, but against the growing frustration of an old empire that was quickly running out of patience, and might soon decide that brute force was worth the risk, no matter what it woke up. The Halcyon slipped through the debris field like a ghost, its engines running at the barest fraction of their normal power, every non-essential system shut down to keep its signature as small as possible. Ingrid guided the ship between broken chunks of rock that had once been part of living worlds, her hands steady on the controls despite the danger growing closer with every passing minute. On the bridge, Elena kept her eyes fixed on the ancient structure ahead, its carved surface catching what little starlight reached this dead corner of the galaxy. The Skarn ships continued firing on it in short, frustrated bursts, each beam absorbed harmlessly into the surface without leaving a mark. It was clear the Skarn commanders had no idea what they were dealing with, only that it was old, powerful, and refusing to open for them. "We're within transmission range," Ingrid said quietly, her voice barely above a whisper even though there was no real need to whisper on a silent ship. "Another 2 minutes, and we'll be as close as I can safely get us without drifting into a Skarn scanner arc." Elena nodded, pulling up the hidden sequence she had discovered buried beneath the coordinate data, the one she still was not entirely certain about. "I'll need a direct, narrow-beam transmission aimed at the structure. Nothing broad enough for the Skarn to notice." "You'll have it," Marcus said, nodding to one of the technical crew, who began preparing the ship's communication array for the precise, low-power transmission Elena needed. As the Halcyon closed the final distance, Elena found herself staring at the ancient structure with a strange mixture of fear and awe. Up close, the carvings covering its surface were even more detailed than anything on the meridian disk, intricate patterns that seemed to shift slightly depending on the angle of the light, almost as if the structure itself were alive in some slow, patient way. "Ready when you are, Doctor," the technician said. Elena took a breath and gave the signal. The narrow beam shot out from the Halcyon, invisible to any sensor not specifically tuned to catch it, striking the ancient structure directly. For a long moment, nothing happened. Elena's stomach tightened, certain for a heartbeat that she had misread the sequence, that this entire risky approach had been for nothing. Then the structure changed. Lines of soft blue light began spreading across its surface, tracing the same patterns that had been carved into the stone, as if the entire moon-sized object were slowly waking from a very long sleep. The light grew brighter, pulsing gently, and a section of the structure's surface began to shift and fold inward, revealing a dark opening large enough for a ship to pass through. It worked, Elena breathed, equal parts relieved and terrified by what she had just done. The Skarn ships noticed immediately. Their weapons' fire stopped, and all 3 vessels began adjusting course toward the newly opened entrance, no longer interested in whatever their own scanners might reveal about the small human ship hiding nearby. "They're moving in," Ingrid warned. If we don't get through that opening before they seal it off or claim it for themselves, we lose our chance to see what's inside. Marcus made the decision instantly. Take us in, full stealth, minimum profile. We're not going to win a fight against 3 Skarn ships, but we might be able to slip past them while they're focused on getting inside first. The Halcyon surged forward, following close behind the lead Skarn vessel as it approached the opening, staying low and quiet enough that none of the Skarn sensors caught the small ship trailing in its wake. They passed through the entrance together, the darkness of the structure's interior swallowing them both, and for a moment, everything on the Halcyon's sensors went white with static as unfamiliar energy fields washed over the ship. When the sensors cleared, what they revealed left everyone on the bridge speechless. The inside of the structure was not simply a hollow shell, as everyone had expected. It was a vast, open space, filled with what looked like an entire miniature world suspended in artificial light. Rings of pale green growth wrapped around a central core, towers and structures built in patterns that echoed the carvings on the outer shell. And at the very center, a massive column of pulsing light that reached from the structure's floor all the way to its distant, curved ceiling. "This isn't a weapon," Alina said quietly, staring at the scene in wonder. "This is a shelter, a vault. Someone built this to protect something, not to destroy anything." The 3 Skarn ships had already begun descending toward the structure's floor, clearly intending to land near the central column. Marcus guided the Halcyon to a quieter corner, tucking the small ship behind one of the tower-like structures where its stealth systems could keep it hidden a while longer. "We need to get down there," Alina said, already moving toward the ship's small boarding bay. "Whatever this place is, whatever it's protecting, I need to see it up close before the Skarn get their hands on it." Marcus hesitated only a moment before nodding. "Ingrid, keep the ship ready to move the second we call. If this goes wrong, we may need to leave in a hurry." He turned to Alina. "You're with me. Stay close." The 2 of them, along with 2 of the ship's technical crew acting as security, took one of the Halcyon's small shuttle pods down toward the structure's floor, landing quietly a short distance from where the Skarn had already gathered near the central column. From a hidden vantage point behind a cluster of pale, glowing plants, Alina and Marcus watched as Skarn technicians worked to interface with a control panel built into the base of the column, their movements growing more frustrated with each passing minute. "They can't get it to respond," Alina whispered, studying the scene through a small handheld scanner. "Same problem as outside. This place wasn't built for them." "Then maybe it's time we found out exactly who it was built for," Marcus said. Before Alina could respond, one of the Skarn technicians noticed movement near their hidden position, and within seconds, alarms rang out among the Skarn party. Marcus and Alina's small group were quickly surrounded, weapons trained on them from every direction, as the lead Skarn officer, a broad, heavily armored figure Alina recognized from earlier fleet transmissions as Commander Ruskell Vane, stepped forward with obvious surprise. "Humans," Ruskell said, his translated voice carrying a mixture of disbelief and anger. "You followed us all this way in that little ship of yours, impressive and foolish." Marcus raised his hand slowly, signaling for his own people to do the same. "We're not here to fight you, Commander. We're here because that disk your people stole belongs to Earth, and because whatever's inside this structure clearly isn't something either of our species fully understands yet. It belongs to whoever can unlock it," Ruskell snapped back. "My people were the guardians of the Warden legacy long before your species learned to build a single ship. We have searched for centuries for exactly this kind of discovery, and I will not let a handful of young, arrogant humans stand in the way of restoring my empire's rightful place among the stars." "Then why can't you open it?" Alina asked quietly. The question hung in the air, and for a moment, Ruskell's confident expression faltered. "The disk is right there," Alina continued, nodding toward a case one of the Skarn technicians was carrying, the meridian disk visible through its transparent surface, silent and inert without the hidden sequence needed to make it truly useful. "You have the map. You found the location, but you can't open the vault, can you? Because the map alone was never enough." Ruskel's grip tightened on the weapon at his side, though he did not raise it. "You know something." It was not a question. Alina glanced at Marcus, who gave the smallest of nods, trusting her judgment even in a moment as dangerous as this one. "I know that this structure wasn't built by your ancestors or mine. It was built by the Wardens, exactly as your legends say. And I know that whatever they left behind here wasn't meant to be claimed by force. It was meant to be given to whoever proved worthy of understanding it." "Sentimental nonsense," Ruskel said, though his voice lacked its earlier certainty. "Maybe," Alina said. "Or maybe it's exactly why your weapons couldn't scratch the outside of this place, and why your technicians can't get that column to respond, no matter how hard they try. This isn't a door that opens for anyone strong enough to force it. It's a door that opens for someone the Wardens trusted enough to leave the key with in the first place." The vast chamber around them fell silent, save for the low, steady pulse of light from the central column, as if the ancient structure itself were waiting patiently to see what would happen next, exactly as it had waited for 80,000 years before this very moment. Commander Ruskel Vane stared at Alina for a long moment, his weapon still lowered but his patience clearly running thin. Around them, Skarn's soldiers kept their weapons trained on the small human party, waiting only for their commander's word. "You speak as if you know the will of a race that vanished before either of our species existed," Ruskel said finally. "That is a very convenient story for someone who wants me to simply hand over what my people have searched for across generations." "I'm not asking you to hand over anything," Alina said carefully. "I'm telling you what the evidence shows. Your weapons couldn't damage the outer shell. Your technicians can't activate the column. If strength alone could open this place, Commander, you would have already done it. Something else is required, and I think you know that, or you wouldn't still be standing here talking instead of already tearing this structure apart." For a moment, nobody moved. Then Ruskel turned to the technician holding the case with the meridian disk inside. "Bring it here." The technician obeyed, setting the case down carefully in front of the central column. Ruskel opened it himself, lifting the ancient disk out with both hands, studying its carved surface as if searching for some answer hidden in its patterns that his people had somehow missed after all their years of searching. "If your species truly understands this device better than mine," Ruskel said, turning back to Alina, "then perhaps it is time you proved it. Show me what you know, human. Show me, and perhaps I will believe there is more to your claims than convenient stories." Marcus tensed beside her, clearly uneasy about walking further into danger, but Alina stepped forward anyway. This was, after all, the entire reason they had come this far. She approached the column slowly, aware of every weapon still aimed in her direction, and studied the control panel built into its base. It was similar in design to the surface of the meridian disk itself, covered in the same fine, spiraling patterns. Drawing on everything her team had learned over the past weeks, Alina began tracing the hidden sequence she had discovered, not onto the disk this time, but directly onto the column's panel, hoping the same key might work in more than one place. At first, nothing happened, and Alina felt her confidence waver under the weight of dozens of watching eyes. Then, slowly, the panel beneath her fingers began to glow with the same soft blue light that had opened the structure's outer shell. The light spread up the column in a steady wave, growing brighter and brighter, until the entire chamber was bathed in a warm, pulsing glow. A voice spoke then, not from any single source, but seemingly from the structure itself, translated instantly by systems built into the Halcyon's equipment and relayed to everyone present. It was calm, patient, and utterly without emotion, exactly as one might expect from a message recorded countless thousands of years earlier, waiting silently for this precise moment to finally play. "Guardianship confirmed," the voice said. "Warden legacy protocols reactivated. This vault contains knowledge and technology preserved for the successor species, chosen not by strength, but by the pattern of growth recognized within the Meridian record. Analysis complete. Successor species identified, human." The chamber fell into stunned silence. Ruskel's grip on the disk in his hands tightened until his knuckles paled beneath his gray skin. "That is impossible," he said quietly. "My people have searched for this legacy for centuries. We fought wars over fragments of Warden technology. We sacrificed everything trying to prove ourselves worthy successors. And you are telling me that this ancient machine has chosen a species that has existed in space for barely more than a decade." "I don't think it's about how long we've existed," Alina said gently, understanding in that moment exactly what the Wardens had likely intended all along. "I think it's about what we did with the time we had, about patterns of growth, cooperation, curiosity. Not conquest." The voice continued, unmoved by the tension in the room. "Warning: this vault contains defensive systems calibrated to protect Warden legacy technology from unauthorized extraction. Non-successor entities attempting forced removal will trigger containment protocols." As if to demonstrate the truth of this warning, the ground beneath the Skarn soldiers began to hum faintly, and thin lines of the same blue light traced upward from the floor, surrounding each Skarn individual in a soft, glowing outline. It was not an attack, not exactly, but it was clearly a system fully capable of becoming one if provoked. Ruskell looked around at his soldiers, then back at Alina, his expression a mixture of anger, exhaustion, and something that looked almost like grief. "Generations," he said quietly. "Generations of searching, believing we were meant to inherit something greater, only to learn we were never even considered." Alina felt a genuine pang of sympathy for him, despite everything his people had done. "Commander, I don't think the Wardens chose humanity because we're better than the Skarn, or better than anyone else in the Conquered. I think this place was simply waiting for whichever species reached this point in the right way, at the right time with the right intentions. That could have been anyone. It happened to be us." For a long, tense moment, nobody spoke. Then Ruskell set the meridian disc down carefully on the ground in front of Alina, stepping back from it slowly. "Take it," he said, his voice heavy. "Take your legacy, human, and take your disc. My people will not fight a war against a system that has already judged us unworthy, not today, and not for a prize that clearly was never meant to be ours." He turned to his soldiers and gave a quiet order. One by one, the Skarn began retreating toward their shuttle, their earlier confidence replaced by something quieter and more bitter. Ruskell paused at the edge of the chamber, looking back one final time. "This is not over, human," he said, though there was little real threat left in his voice. "But it is over for today." Without another word, he turned and left, following his soldiers back toward their waiting ships. Marcus let out a breath he seemed to have been holding for a very long time, then moved quickly to Alina's side as she carefully picked up the meridian disc, holding it with the same reverence she had felt the very first day she had seen it pulled from the Antarctic ice. "Guardianship confirmed," the ancient voice repeated softly, as if satisfied that the matter had been settled. "Access to preserved knowledge and technology now open to designated successor species. Instructions will be provided upon formal request." Alina looked around at the vast chamber, at the towers and glowing rings of growth, at the massive column still pulsing gently with light, and felt the full weight of what had just happened settle over her. Humanity, barely a decade into its journey among the stars, had just been named heir to something built by a civilization so old that no living species had any true memory of them. "We need to report this to Fleet Command," Marcus said quietly, though his voice carried a note of wonder he could not quite hide. "And to the Conquered Council. Carefully. This changes everything, Alina, every relationship, every balance of power. People are going to want answers about what's actually inside this place." "They'll get them," Alina said, cradling the disc carefully in her arms. "But this time on our terms and at a pace we choose. We didn't ask for this. But now that we have it, I think it's time humanity finally started acting like a species that belongs among the stars, instead of one still trying to prove it deserves a seat at the table." As the Halcyon prepared to leave the ancient vault behind, carrying with it the recovered meridian disc and the first small pieces of knowledge from a civilization lost to time, Alina allowed herself, for the first time in weeks, a genuine smile. The galaxy shown on that old, worn star map no longer existed. but somewhere in its careful, patient carvings, it had left behind a message that did survive. One final gift passed down across 80,000 years, waiting quietly in the dark for a species brave enough, curious enough, and decent enough to finally come and claim it. Humanity, it seemed, had passed the test, and its true journey among the stars was only just beginning.